claims of murder and torture against Iraq war veterans. Today, a tribunal found he'd acted dishonestly, spending thousands of pounds to find clients and encouraging a witness to change his evidence. The Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, said he should apologise to the soldiers. Here's our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale.
Once an award-winning human rights lawyer, tonight Phil Shiner's reputation lies in tatters. He made his name at the expense of the British armies and the taxpayer, accusing soldiers of widespread abuse during the Iraq War.
I don't know whether people were killed, but I think something went wrong. We need to find out who was responsible and who in command knew what on earth was going on here. They were kept naked, they were sexually humiliated.
Today, a tribunal upheld 12 charges of misconduct against him, including 5 charges of acting dishonestly. He was ordered to pay £250,000. He's been struck off and will never work as a lawyer again. The tribunal also heard Shiner paid an Iraqi agent more than £1.5 million to knock on doors, trawling for business. This was the aftermath of the incident that proved his undoing, the Battle of Danny Boy in Iraq in 2004.
It culminated with soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, fixing bayonets and fighting through heavily defended enemy positions.
Acts of bravery, though, were soon followed by allegations that they murdered, mutilated and tortured Iraqis. A 5-year inquiry costing £30 million found those claims were built on lies and without foundation.
The process of going through the last 10 years has put a great deal of stress on my family, particularly who found it difficult to understand why the process was being applied in the way it was, and to my soldiers and their families as well.
What do you want from Phil Shiner now?
I'd simply ask him to apologise to soldiers and families that have been put through the stresses and strains of the last decade.
There is proof of mistreatment by British soldiers. It was Phil Shiner who highlighted the case of Baha Musa, an Iraqi hotel worker battered to death in British custody. But it was just one of the hundreds of allegations he made.
British Army standards are some of the highest in the world. He's caused a great deal of misery, and I'm pleased now at least that we see justice being done.
The Prime Minister too has promised to end what she calls an industry of vexatious claims against British troops, though dozens of allegations of historic abuse are still being investigated. But for Phil Shiner, this is the end of his career. A man who once sought the limelight, but who's now gone to ground. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Well, with me is our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley. Caroline, I wonder what effect this might have on any outstanding cases against British soldiers.
Well, it's a good question because in all, Phil Shiner brought more than 2,000 claims of abuse against British soldiers. Some have already been dismissed, but it was the sheer volume of claims and the fact that Phil Shiner had asked the International Criminal Court to investigate that led to the government setting up a major investigation called the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, looking into these claims of abuse. We have had a statement this afternoon from that investigation I had, and it says that the evidence presented at the Solicitor's Disciplinary Tribunal against Phil Shiner casts serious doubt on the reliability of some of the remaining allegations, and they're now trying to work out which of the allegations brought by Phil Shiner's firm should now be investigated. But don't think that the end of Phil Shiner's career means that we've necessarily heard the end of abuse in Iraq, because among that massive claims, I've been told there are some that are serious and are deemed to be credible.
All right, Caroline, thank you very much. Thank you.
All cases brought by a disgraced human rights lawyer against Iraq war veterans are being reviewed after he was struck off for misconduct. Phil Shiner was found to have acted dishonestly, including paying a fixer to change his evidence to the £31 million inquiry into the abuse allegations. Paul McNamara has this.
They've heard these executions preceded by torture or mutilations.
The scene you're watching is the aftermath of a supposed massacre that never happened.
It's more likely that our clients are telling the truth.
That voice is the lawyer Phil Shiner, who chased British soldiers for the part he believed they played.
That in custody cases
Today, Mr. Shiner is a man disgraced, struck off from practicing law, found to have acted dishonestly. Today's verdict is long overdue for Colonel James Coote, a young major when serving in Basra in 2004.
The time it's taken to bring these investigations to a conclusion has been very difficult for me, for my family, and I know for the soldiers who I've remained in contact with. So for many of us, I'm sure it will be reassuring to be now at the end of a chapter and allow us to move forwards.
The Al Swedi inquiry investigated claims brought by Phil Shiner's company, Public Interest Lawyers, against British soldiers following the Battle of Danny Boy in Iraq in 2004. It took 5 years, cost £25 million, and in the end found that all allegations were entirely the product of deliberate lies. For the last week, Mr. Shiner's own actions had been under investigation by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. And today he had 5 counts of dishonesty and 12 charges of misconduct proved against him. In 2009, this programme interviewed Mazin Yunus, Mr. Shiner's Iraqi fixer.
Those people, they will call me and they'll tell me their story. What I do is I pass it to the lawyers here in the UK.
But he didn't just wait for calls. According to this week's hearing, he went to knock doors and carry out cold calling, all strictly forbidden.
Soldiers' lives have been made a misery, said the Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon today, and that justice has finally been served. But he also said that the Ministry of Defence will study any implications for outstanding legal claims closely. And that's a big question right now. How will this case affect other allegations of abuse? How will this case affect investigations in the future?
There have been legitimate investigations, like that of Baha Musa, a receptionist who died in army custody in 2003 after suffering 93 separate injuries. An inquiry found he was the victim of gratuitous violence. Solicitors for soldiers under investigation believe the entire system needs to be overhauled for the good of their clients and those abused.
There has to be a fundamental change in how we deal with these cases. If we go into an area of conflict, if we invade another country, we have to think of the consequences and the backup, and we have to look after our men and women when they come back from those conflict areas as well.
There are currently more than 1,500 allegations of abuse being investigated by the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, many brought by Phil Shiner and Public Interest Lawyers.